I don't think there's been a time, well, I'm not going to say no time, but it's seldom you have a movie that is so polarizing in one direction. I'm not going to say this movie is universally hated. It's not hated, but the reviews across the board are, I guess you could say, scathing. We're talking about Rebel Moon. My take on this movie, I will tell you right now, is going to be unorthodox. I think we've run into a problem when it comes to movie viewing in this day and age. I'm going to read you something that I posted to my uh Twitter page, and I know I am very confident that there's not going to be many people who agree with this stance, but here's what I posted. My thoughts on Rebel Moon. I believe everyone has become so super critical that the ability to simply enjoy a well done movie is almost lost. This movie was visually pleasing from the opening scene to closing. I've heard that the pacing was either too slow or too fast. I, on the other hand, didn't have an issue because, as I stated, I watched it for enjoyment, not as a critic. The acting and character development was exactly what was to be expected from a movie building a new universe and franchise. If you go into this movie to enjoy a good movie, you will be pleased. With any movie, even your favorite movie, if you go in with the idea to pick apart anything you don't like, then no feature film will ever meet your standards. This was written by a fan of cinema, not a critic. I thought some of the critiques were odd. It almost felt like the movie was only watched by critics. So I went in empty of all that and came away with a much different opinion. This is just my opinion based on what I like. It isn't law. And what I found with Rebel Moon is the opinions of some have almost become law. Like it feels like if you have anything positive to say about this movie without much negative, that you are outside the norm, and it's almost seen as strange. Now, there are some movies that are universally liked and universally hated in certain camps. This happens. Everybody has things they like and things they don't like. There's movies that I love that people hate. But when I go into a movie, it is not my goal to be an extreme critic. Is this movie enjoyable? Would I sit down and enjoy this movie, or is it just terrible? Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was kind of in that same vein, in my opinion. I think because of a lot of the negative press Marvel's gotten over the past year, 2 years, 3 years, and deservedly so. Marvel has had some missteps, and the critiques are warranted. And it's not like Rebel Moon is a movie that doesn't warrant some critique. It does. Again, no movie is going to be so perfect that you go in and you think, oh, everything about that movie was excellent and there was just nothing bad. There are some movies that break through and that are universally loved. It just has an appeal that most people can rock with, and we just all love it. That happens. It's rare, but it does happen. I think one of those movies is something like an Interstellar. I'm not sure if I've seen anyone who did not like Interstellar. It was just a good plot, good movie, well done. I think Rebel Moon is a victim of nostalgia. Now, I don't know what the reviews were initially like for the original Star Wars series. So this movie was sold as, I guess, Zack Snyder pitched it to Lucasfilms for a Star Wars movie. They rejected it, and he decided to make it its own thing. So you'll definitely see the Star Wars influence. People took issue with the fact that so many things in this movie took inspiration from other things. I find that as an odd critique, and here's the reason. Any creator took inspiration from other creations. I'll give you an example using comic books. If you read comic books and you read comic books in the late 80s, early 90s, let's say from 88 to about 93. If you remember the Wildcats, first introduced by Image Comics, created by Jim Lee, you knew without a doubt this was inspired by X-Men. I mean, you had a whole character with metal claws. You knew, oh, this isn't 100% inspired by Wolverine. Like, without a doubt, this character was inspired by Wolverine. Like, you could look at each character and tell, oh, okay, this was inspired by Cyclops. This one was inspired by Jean Grey. That's just like you're not going to get away from that. Again, especially if you're a creative. Now, this doesn't mean you have to completely just copy what somebody else did, but you see the inspiration. So you can tell Rebel Moon is inspired by Star Wars. It's evident right out the gate. Again, if it was sold as a Star Wars movie, like a Star Wars pitch, then evidently, if you take this movie and then decide, okay, I'm just going to make it its own thing, well, duh, it's going to look somewhat like Star Wars. And I was going back to Star Wars in the 70s when it came out. I don't know what the reviews were like for Star Wars. I don't know if it was 100% everybody loved it or if there were mixed reviews. I wasn't alive when Star Wars was created. I was born 3 years later, 79. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Star Wars was first released in 77 or 76. I could be wrong about that. I think it was somewhere around there. So here's another thing this movie fell victim of. I think it would have been better if we didn't know that it was meant as a trilogy. And I think this is where the movie gained some criticism because of the knowledge that people had. If you did not know that this movie was a trilogy, then you would understand why the characters were seemingly rushed along to the end plot point. But because we know this is a trilogy, we want that slowed down dramatically and built over time. Now, this is where you get into a catch-22. And I'm going to use the Rippaverse to explain this catch-22. When Eric July released iSum #1, people complained that they didn't get enough information in that first book. Enough things weren't explained. iSum's powers weren't explained. Why he retired as a hero wasn't explained. But I had the opposite take. I thought, well, this makes me want to come back for more. You didn't go into detail. You didn't explain these things. You didn't rush through the story. And I like that. I like that buildup. Okay, I'm coming back. I want to know what happens next. With Rebel Moon, you get the exact opposite critique. Characters were introduced. Things were built up really quick, fast paced, moving you right along. What are the complaints of people? Slow it down. Why do I say this? I say this because you cannot please everyone. As a creative, you cannot please everyone. If anything has taught me that, it's making these YouTube videos. I had one video, this was probably a few months ago, where there was someone in the comments that was upset that I had anything positive to say about a mainstream comic book. They felt like that was a slight to the Rippaverse, that I would even comment on or have anything positive to say about one of the big two in comics. It was a Marvel comic I was reviewing. They took issue with the fact that I reviewed that comic and had anything good to say. I should be bashing them 100%. You can't please everyone. I enjoy comic books. I don't care who puts the book out. DC has some books even now that are good, contrary to popular belief. Marvel has some books out now that are good, contrary to popular belief. They're not all good. And for the most part, these companies have major issues. I'm aware of that. Doesn't change the fact that some of the things they have are good. Rebel Moon, if you go in minus a critical mind, now I'm not saying not to critically think. I'm saying if you go in with the thought that I'm going to pick apart everything in this movie that I even noticed remotely that could have been done better, you won't enjoy the movie. If you go in thinking, okay, Zack Snyder building a new universe, new franchise, does it hold up? Is it decent? Is it enjoyable? I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed the visuals from opening to close. I enjoyed the acting. I enjoyed the acting scenes. A lot of people complain about the CGI, but here's the thing. This is not a theatrical release. This is a streaming release. People are expecting Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Apple TV Plus. They're expecting all of these different streaming services to give you the exact same experience you get in the theater. You're not going to get that. This is different. If you look at the experience you got in, let's say, in the late 90s, consuming music, it's different than the way you consume music now. You can't really compare those things. It's not apples to apples. Listening to an album on vinyl is a much different experience than streaming an album. Completely different. And to expect to have that same exact experience, man, I don't think that's fair. And I think Rebel Moon is not getting a fair shake. Like I said, I think it's a victim of nostalgia. I think it's a victim of inspiration. And I think it's a victim of super criticism. We have lost the ability to simply go into a movie and enjoy the movie for what it is, whether it is inspired by something else or not. Look, every now and again, a creative person comes along in whatever respect, whether it be art, music, cinema, and they create something completely brand new. But I'm going to be honest with you, often what most people do, even creatives, is they draw from inspiration they got from someone else who is a creative. You kind of got to expect that. Again, I think Rebel Moon is really getting a bad shake. It is not, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's the most groundbreaking movie I've ever seen. But if you go into this movie and you say to yourself, I just want to know, can I enjoy this movie? Is this an enjoyable movie? My answer is yes, it absolutely is.